Before we start sewing, we first need to thread our needle and tie off the thread. So I'm going to show you how I like to do this. It's kind of like how you would tie a balloon. You're going to wrap it around your finger. I like to do it 2 or 3 times before pulling the loose end through, and that way you have like a triple knot, so it's going to be extra secure. So pull it through, pull the strings apart, make sure that it's super tight, and then cut off the excess. Today we're going to be using a volume weft. It has a machine tied seam on the top, which is going to be used as our anchoring point for our thread, as our starting point, and for our corners. So first measure 3 pockets back from the front corner, and this is where we're going to pull the needle through before we even get started sewing it with the hair. You're going to push the needle through the back of the weft and then pull it straight through so that the knot is laying on the side that we line with the head. Get your weft into position, use clips, make sure that you have the 3rd pocket lined up with your starting point on your weft. So we're 3rd pocket back, 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to first start off with a lock stitch. A lock stitch is when you pull the needle between the 2 strings that make up your thread. So first we're going to go through the pocket and then underneath the seam of the weft, catching the hair. We're not pushing it through the top this time. And then before you pull the string all the way through, you're going to split it and put your needle in between those 2 strings. And this is your lock stitch. Now that we have the lock stitch in place, we're going to get started with our blanket stitch. And this is the stitch that we're going to use the rest of the time. But we can't just jump to the next pocket. We have to go back in the same pocket and do a blanket stitch before we can move over to the second. And this is going to be true the entire time. You never jump after making a attachment point like a corner or the starting point like the lock stitch to the next pocket. You have to do a blanket stitch first in the exact same pocket. A blanket stitch just means you're going to pull the needle through the loop that you've created with your thread. Unlike the first stitch where we separated the string, this time you want to make sure your strings stay together, but they create a circle that you pull the needle through. So that was the 3rd pocket. Now we're going to go into the second, staying on the left side of the first bead, and then we'll go to the right pocket, and we're going to stay on the right side of the bead. We're not going under the bead, but we are going underneath the seam on the top of the weft. We are not piercing it. These are 3 blanket stitches, and this is what we need to start with before we actually secure the corner. To secure the corner, we're going to do another blanket stitch, but this time, instead of going underneath the seam and catching the hair, we're actually going to push the needle through the seam. We can't do it in one movement, so we're going to pull the needle through the pocket of hair first, and then keeping the thread in a straight line, we're just going to push the needle through the back of the weft. We don't want to create any sort of knot yet, but we're going to pull it up and through, just like how we've been doing the rest of our blanket stitches. So we have it through the seam of the weft, so it's going to be super secured, and then we're going to pull it straight up. And this is, again, another blanket stitch, but because it's pulled through the weft, it is locked in place. And that's it. I don't like to do too many knots on the corners because it makes a move up practically impossible, but that's going to be secured. Now we're going to go back and do our blanket stitching again, but we have to go through the same pocket before we move to the left. So we're still in the first pocket. We're doing a normal blanket stitch going underneath the seam, and then we're going to jump from the first pocket to the second, never jumping from the first to the 3rd or the 4th. We have to go back through each side of each bead. So that's the first pocket. We're going to go to the second, do another blanket stitch, and work all the way from the right to the left. Again, a blanket stitch is just pulling your needle through the center of your loop. So when you're working from the right side to the left side, the easiest way to just make it simple is pull the loose thread across the top of the seam, and that way your needle is already in the center of the loop when you pull it up. You want to make sure that your weft is the precise length to fit your beads. So whether that means customizing where your beads go or where you cut your weft, you're going to make sure that the corner of your weft lines up with the very far pocket of your first bead. And again, we've just been blanket stitching all the way from the right side to the left side until we get to the very far left corner, which is technically the first pocket on the left side. That's where we're going to do our same tie-off method. It's exactly the same as the right. The only difference is that we're going to work back to the 3rd pocket and then make a knot to tie off the very last string. So now that we've made it to the first pocket on the left side, this is going to be the last pocket that we sew in, so this will be our corner. We're going to go ahead and do a regular blanket stitch to start, And then we will do exactly what we did on the right side, which is make a blanket stitch, pulling the needle through the top seam of the weft. So I've left a little space on the corner to put the needle through. So we're gonna go ahead and put the needle through the back pocket, pull it all the way through so we're not adding extra tension. As you can see there, that would be really uncomfortable. So we're gonna go ahead and pull the needle all the way through and then pierce the top of the weft. This is still technically a blanket stitch. We have been doing blanket stitches the entire time after doing our very first lock stitch to begin. If we were doing this with a hand-tied weft, the only difference would be that these corners would need a lock stitch because you can't pierce the weft. So it's the only difference. As you can see here, we're going through the center of the loop. It's a blanket stitch, just like all the other ones. And then we're gonna work our way back to the third pocket. So we'll do one more blanket stitch in that same spot, just like how we did in the front. And then we'll work from the first pocket to the second pocket to the third, and then we will use the top seam of the weft to tie off the knot. So again, this is gonna be a blanket stitch. We're gonna go underneath the seam this time instead of through the top of the weft, and then we're gonna work over to the right. The main difference when you're going from left to right, since we've been going from right to left this whole time, is just to make sure that you're still pulling the thread through the center loop instead of pulling the top thread across like how we used to. We're just going to leave it on the left side, and that way the needle is already in the middle. So we're going to pull this through, do one more, and then I'll show you how to tie off the knot. And when we do make our final knot, we're not going to be using the client's hair. So we won't pull the needle through a pocket of hair at all. We're just going to be pushing it through the back of the top of the weft. To tie off our thread, we're going to pierce the top seam of the weft, just like how we did to start, just like how we did on the corners. We're going to try to get it as close as possible to that last blanket stitch, but we're not going to pull it all the way through. We're going to leave the back in just a little bit. We're going to use the thread on the left side, not where the thread is still attached to the needle, but the loose thread that was attached to your blanket stitch. We're going to wrap that around the needle 3 times. So make sure you keep tension on your thread, that all your blanket stitches are nice and tight. And you're going to wrap this around 3 times and kind of slide the thread down to the base so they're all condensed together. And you want to do this part slowly to make sure that it stays neat and that you don't get knots that are loose. You want to keep everything really tight. And then you're going to need to use your fingers or your nails, something that you can get good grip on the thread, and hold all 3 of those loops together at the base of the weft. And then you're going to pull your needle all the way through, again, being really slow, making sure that it's all staying very tight. And then that's going to leave you with a triple knot at the very, very top of your weft. If you want to be extra sure that your knot's not going to come undone, you can make additional knots on top of that knot. You can cut the string with a little bit of length so that way you can get your fingers around them and make some knots. This is not necessary in my opinion if you've done a really good job with your initial triple knot on the needle, but it's not bad practice. When you're done, you'll want to cut off the excess so that way there's not any string just kind of hanging, but that's really all the knotting that you need to do. This is just one way to install a weft. There's a million different ways. You can always experiment. You can make more knots, but more knots doesn't always mean more secure, and it sometimes makes it harder to move up. But practice and find out what works best for you.